Hello, welcome back to the Create Me Free podcast. This is where we explore how health and circumstance impact creativity in a variety of different ways. My name is Catherine Versillo. I have been studying this through a variety of different means for quite a long time, including a lot of lived experience with navigating my own health challenges as a working full-time creative. I have developed a framework called the Creative Health Cartography Framework, where I've kind of identified and sorted 6 different key areas where health tends to impact creativity, creative process, medium, content, productivity, identity, and business. We, in this podcast season 1, we are looking at those 6 different areas through the lens of a workbook I created to help other people go through the same material and kind of figure out how health is impacting creativity, what adaptations you have made and could make. Right now, we are working through the medium section. So in the past couple of episodes, I have kind of shared my own story of the mediums that I have worked in and how they relate to my health. And now today, I'm going to go into a little bit more theory. So each episode is a little bit different. And this one is more theory-based. So I'm going to look at some different mechanisms for how health changes medium. I want to talk again about medium is the materials that you use, the area you work in. So you're a writer, you're a poet, you're a musician, you're a ceramicist. Those are your mediums, those materials. The various tools you use, the adaptations you make, and our health can really significantly impact that in different ways. So I just want to read again something from the workbook. I read this last week. I'll keep it shorter this time, but I want to say, for artists navigating health challenges, medium choice is frequently a negotiation between desire and capacity. It's between what you want to create and what your body and mind currently allow you to create. So we think of medium as an aesthetic choice or even like a calling, like I'm just meant to be a writer. And that may somewhat be true, but then your health can impact that, right? And change it. And it's a negotiation between what you are able to do and what you actually want to do. And some of the creativity is in navigating that negotiation and the space between the two. So we're going to look at some mechanisms for how health actively changes medium so that you kind of get a sense of what does it mean? What does it mean when I say that health can impact medium? So let's see. All right. Well, guess we'll get started. So health does not just impede the medium relationship. So it's not like I get sick and I stop creating. Sometimes that does happen, but it's usually more complicated. It really restructures the medium relationship. The medium that emerges from a health changed body, material, sorry, let me start over. The medium that emerges from a health-changed body material encounter often carries marks of that restructuring directly in its formal properties. What do I mean? The work that you're creating is different because the relationship between the body you have, body, mind, spirit that you have, and the material that you work with has been forced into a new configuration. The new configuration produces things that the original could not. So yes, you might have a medium that you worked in and then something happens and you have to adapt. Let's say you were a painter, your hand gets injured, you have to adapt. It is possible that you find some way of adapting your physical body so that you can paint in the exact same way that you did before. That is possible. However, what I'm talking about is in order to express yourself with this new body in the way that is perfectly right for this new body, you instead adapt in a way that also changes the work. So you might literally change materials. You might not paint anymore. You lose access to the way your hands work and you end up becoming a spoken word artist instead, for example. Or you might change the materials you work with within the medium. So you might still paint, but you might use watercolors because they're easier for you to navigate than than really fine work with oils, for example, that you did before. So I'll say that again. The work is different because the relationship between the body and the material has been forced into a new configuration. That new configuration produces things that the original would not. You create different things because your relationship with the medium has changed as a result of health or circumstance. So that's what we're talking about. That's everything we're talking about today is the mechanisms by which this happens. I'm going to talk about a few artists, a few theorists, and some different mechanisms. So the first mechanism, actually, it's not a mechanism. Let's start with kind of an underlying concept or overarching concept. I guess you could say it either way. I want to talk about disability studies scholar Rosemary Garland Thompson. I first learned about her work I took a visual and critical studies course called Perceptions. It was all about different ways of looking at things. It was my favorite course in that program. I did a master's program at California College of the Arts, which unfortunately is now closing after being here like 100 years. So it was a 2-year program. I only stayed 1 year. The school was kind of falling apart and didn't work for me, but it was an amazing program that taught me a lot and introduced me to new ways of thinking about things. One of the scholars I learned about was Rosemary Garland Thompson. And I think understanding, so she wrote an essay 2011-ish called Misfits, a feminist materialist disability concept. And it is in this that she introduced her concept of misfitting. And misfitting is what happens when a body and a world are not designed for each other. It's not that the body is wrong. It's not that the body is deficient. It's that the fit between the body and environment is not working. The fit is not right. It's a misfit, literally. Stairs and a wheelchair are a misfit. There's nothing wrong with the person in the wheelchair. There's not actually anything wrong with the stairs, but they are a misfit. They do not fit together. And often the world that we live in as people with illness, disability, any, neurodivergence, often we are asked to fit into a world where it's a misfit for us. Often the world does not adapt. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we get better about it as a society, but a misfit. So the misfit is located in the relationship between the things. It's not in the body alone. There's not something wrong with the body. I just want to be really clear about that. Another misfit is when the open plan office. This was a thing that was super popular for a while. I don't actually have any idea if it still is. I'm not in the office world, but it is a misfit for people with autism or other sensory needs where having that experience is too overwhelming. Nothing wrong with the person. It's just not a good fit. We can talk about the social stuff around that and how adaptations can and should be made. That's not the point of this right now. The point is that sometimes our health impacts our creativity because of the misfit between the world and how we are. When health changes a body's relationship with a medium that was designed for or that previously worked for that body, a misfitting occurs. So the medium is designed for a certain body or previously worked for you in the body that you had. Something has changed in your body and there's a misfit. The body that used to fit the medium does not fit it in the same way. And what artists do with that misfitting varies enormously. Some people leave that medium entirely. Some renegotiate the relationship. Some invent an entirely new method. Some discover that the misfitting itself produces formal properties that the fit could never have reached. So that is not to say that we want health issues, but sometimes we discover that the adaptations we make as a direct result of our health issues produce creative works that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And that can be celebrated. So let's say you're a dancer and generally the medium has been made for a body that works in a certain way, right? Luckily, we know that there are adaptations, there are wheelchair dances, there are all kinds of things, but generally speaking, the world of dance is for a certain type of abled body. If you aren't born with that body, there's a bit of a misfit. if you were a dancer or are a dancer and something happens that changes your body and you can no longer dance in that same way, that is a misfit. And what do you do with that? Do you just stop dancing? Do you stop dancing professionally, but dance in a way that works for you in your own home? Do you choreograph but not dance yourself? Do you invent an entirely new method of dancing in the body that can do that in a certain way? Now, all of those are options. But it's understanding that overarching principle, the misfitting, that framework helps us think about how health impacts creative medium. So with that in mind, here are some different mechanisms. So I'm going to talk first about the affordance shift. So in episode 7, when I introduced this idea of health impacting medium, I did talk about affordances somewhat. So you can go back to episode 7 if you want to hear more details on that. But basically it means an affordance is the action possibilities that an object offers a particular actor based on that actor's specific capacities. So what it affordances, it affords you, sorry, I'm having trouble saying it this time. What you are, what you're afforded. Apparently, I am not afforded right now the ability to accurately describe this mechanism. Let me keep going and see if I can circle back to this. So when our health changes the capacities of the body that we have, the affordances of a familiar medium shift, even though the medium hasn't changed, right? So what I mean is the medium of dance has not changed, but your body has changed and you no longer have the same affordances within dance. Something has to change. So you might have worked in a medium for years and now suddenly working in that medium affords you something different. That's all I mean by affordances. Medium hasn't changed, body has changed. In this case, the misfit is on the body side, but it doesn't mean that the body is a problem. It just means that now there's a misfit, right? What's an example? So let's think about artist Faith Ringgold. She was a not a quilter, she was a painter. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself because a medium. I know her as a quilter. Okay. Faith Ringgold was born in 1930 in Harlem, and she was trained as a painter working in oil on canvas. She was making really ambitious large-scale work, and she was not just a painter. She was a mother, a teacher, an activist. She was doing all of this in busy New York City. She was in small apartments. She had small children. She was on the subway. Lots of demands, right? Lots of demands on the material, the medium that were not met in a straightforward way. Like, how do you paint large scale on canvas with oil when you have a small, crowded apartment and 2 little kids running around, right? Challenging. In 1980, Ringgold created Echoes of Harlem, which was her first story quilt. She made it with her mother, Willie Posey, who was a fashion designer, and this was a shift from painting to quilt making. She's still telling a story and creating an image, but now she's doing it in quilting. It was not primarily an aesthetic choice. It wasn't, oh my God, I love quilts, I need to work in this medium. Maybe that was part of it, but it was also about the material, the medium, the circumstance that she was in, carrying material on the subway, storing it in a small area in an apartment. The weight, the portability of a quilt was significantly different than that of oil painting. So partly she was reconnecting to the textile and craft traditions that oil painting was. Let me start. Okay. Oil painting was seen at a certain level, right? It's that art versus craft narrative. And partly she was embracing craft because she wanted to celebrate that, but partly she just wanted a material that she could take on the subway with her. Like, that's the reality. Her circumstance of where she was living is rooted in that she needed to take the materials with her and she needed to roll them up and put them away. And you can't roll up a wet oil canvas and put it away. So hopefully I'm explaining that okay. What the quilt afforded that the oil canvas did not, talking about affordances, was the integration of text and image in the surface of the work itself. This was a narrative that could travel across the whole surface of a large piece without requiring the same kind of composition and time that the oil paint required. This was a material that could be made in the context of her daily life. It didn't have to be set up in a studio. So she was connecting to her, African American textile traditions. There was a lot going on for her, but it's important to think about the medium also. And part of the switch to the medium was because the circumstances made it easier for her. Ringgold story quilts, including the Tar Beach series and dozens of her subsequent works, became the work she is most known for, which is why when I started and I read my own notes, I was like, wait, she's not a painter. Oh, wait, yeah, she was a painter. I know of her as a quilter. She became known this way. They are formally innovative in ways that have influenced a generation of artists. And that work may not have been opened up for her in the same way if, for example, she was in a practical circumstance that allowed for the oil works to be to be the dominant form for her. So let's say that she had access to a really large studio underneath the apartment where she lived with her kids, and she could just go down there and oil paint, and she could leave her paints up, leave her canvas up, and come back to it. She may never have turned to the quilts in the way that she did because it wasn't necessary. But in this case, it was necessary. And that may be one reason that her circumstances impacted the choice of the quilting medium. My second artist, Henry de Toulouse-Lautrec, was born in 1864 to an aristocratic French family. At age 13, he broke his left femur in a fall. The following year, he broke his right femur. These breaks, understood now to likely indicate a genetic condition that I cannot pronounce the name of. It's a genetic condition that causes brittle bones and abnormal bone development, and that's likely what caused his femurs to break. His legs were really fragile. The point of this is that they did not grow normally after the injuries that he had. And so by the time he was an adult, his torso area was like normally the size of an average, I don't want to say normal, size of an average large man, but his legs were still child-sized. He moved through the cabarets and cafes and music halls at a height of approximately 4'11", but he didn't stand in the back and let that not he didn't let it deter him. He went up to the tables, close to the performers, at an eye level that had no equivalent among the artists who moved through the same spaces at average height. So he, if he was 6'10", he might have just stood in the back and not interacted so closely with the performers in the cabarets and the cafes. Maybe he would have, but maybe not. Because he was little, he moved to the front, he was interacting with them, he was at eye level, he was seeing them a certain way. His lithographs and paintings of performers, including his famous posters for Moulin Rouge, are compositionally organized around that vantage point, standing eyeline and close to the subject. The intimacy, the unusual angle, the sense of being inside rather than observing from the outside. These are all formal properties of his work that come directly from the physical position his condition gave him. This is an affordance shift in the most literal sense. His health changed what the visual environment afforded him as a viewer and as a maker. The visual information he gathered was different from what any other artist in those rooms was gathering. His work is a record of that difference. So I think about this sometimes. I'm little. I'm about 4'11" myself. And sometimes I think about, I wonder what it's like to go through the world as a really tall person. Like you just see completely different things. Your everyday things that you see are completely different from the everyday things that I see. And I'm not saying that I want to necessarily have that experience. I'm just curious, so curious about how different it would be. It comes up when I go to concerts. All I ever see in live music concerts is the backs of people's heads and shoulders. I never see the stage at any concert, no matter where I go. I don't love that people hold up their phones in concerts now, like everyone's holding a phone, but I can often see the stage through the phone of the person in front of me better than I can ever see it just looking, because I usually don't have that vantage point. So my experience of concerts is shaped by that, right? That's what I'm afforded from my experience. The argument here that is being made, that I am making, is it is possible that the reason his his works, his images of the performers in the cabarets and the cafes is unique, and its angle is because of the literal vantage point he had as he moved through those spaces. He just saw things a certain way as a result of his physical self, and therefore painted them that way. That's one way of looking at it. That's not necessarily true, but when you're thinking about your own, I encourage you to think broadly about how health circumstance, just who you are in the world, how you are, is impacting your medium, your choice of medium, your perspective, the materials you choose to work with. Right? Okay. So that is the idea of the affordances. Let's go to our next mechanism. Our next mechanism, the compensatory method. So this is when a new method emerges in direct response to a limitation and the method produces work that the original could not reach. Compensatory. So this is what happens when an artist cannot do the thing the established method requires, physically cannot do it, mentally cannot do it, and the process of finding an alternative invents a method that takes the work somewhere the original never could. I have a different example here that I'll give, but it immediately makes me think of Temple Grandin and the work that she did creating in the like slaughterhouses. If you know her work, you know what I'm talking about. But because of her autism, she couldn't she perceived things in a different way. She couldn't do them the way they were initially, the established way. Out of necessity, she created a different way. She invented a method that the work wouldn't have happened if she wouldn't have created that method if she wasn't dealing with the direct experience of her autistic sensory issues. So, compensatory. The artist that I actually made notes for here is Henri Matisse. So Matisse was 67 years old in 1941 when he was diagnosed with abdominal cancer. He underwent 2 major surgeries that year and spent much of the following period bedridden or in a wheelchair. He previously would stand at the easel for a sustained period of time. Oil painting required him to do that the way that he had always done it, but now he was too weak to do that. He had been a painter for 50 years, and he had always stood at the easel this way. Painting was the whole of his practice. Standing at the canvas with brushes and paint was not just like one thing he did of many things. That was the only thing he had ever really done. What he discovered while he was healing, while he was convalescing, and he couldn't stand like that, he could have done anything, right? He could have found a different way he could have found a way to sit down and paint, right? But that's not what he did. He ended up working in a completely different medium. He took these large sheets of paper and painted them a certain way. He worked with assistants, and then he would cut shapes from them and arrange them in like collage style cutouts. I think he called them cutouts, if I'm remembering that correctly. And basically he created these collages. He began working in an entirely new medium. So he described his scissors as the tool that finally gave him what brushes were not able to give him, which was the ability to cut directly into color rather than applying color, to create form and color simultaneously rather than sequentially. When you paint, you have to create the form, add the color, right? With the scissors, he could do the form and the color simultaneously. He was not adapting to paint despite his incapacity. He was doing something entirely new, but he was forced to do it because he needed to adapt because he couldn't do how he had done before. The cutouts he produced in the last decade of his life, from Jazz series in 1947 through the Venice Chapel works, his late scale works. So all of the last decade of his works, some people consider to be his most radical, wonderful work. The flat planes of pure color, the simplified shapes cut with the directness of a line, the relationship between figure and ground organized through the cut form rather than the painted mark. These are qualities that were not available to him in painting. They required the method, and the method required the condition. He would not have come to that. And he was clear about this. He wrote, "I have needed all of that time to reach the stage where I can say what I want to say. The cutouts were the culmination of a life's work." It was the final method was the limitation that he had forced him to eventually get to where he felt he was always going. Yeah. So that's compensatory. He changed his entire medium because he could no longer do it the way he was doing it before. Mechanism 3, the material as body map. So this is what happens when health changes what the nervous system can tolerate. This is one close to me, my heart. I talk a lot about the window of tolerance and fight or flight, sensory experiences as well. So um, this is what happens when the health changes what the nervous system can tolerate or requires from materials. The body begins navigating towards the materials that meet those requirements in ways that feel more like biological necessity than aesthetic choice. So my nervous system drifted towards crochet because it was healing to me. I didn't choose yarn, yarn chose me, in a sense. The medium that emerges from this navigation carries the marks of the nervous system's needs in its specific sensory properties. Um, Louise Bourgeois is the artist that I have noted here to talk about. She was born in Paris in 1911 and had one of the longest careers in 20th century art, working until her death in 2010 at the age of 98. Throughout that time, she worked in different mediums. She worked in sculpture, installation, drawing, and print. Her sculptures in particular are among her most recognized works, but she also worked in fabric, and people don't talk about it that much. Fabric really interests me because of the nervous system experiences I've had with how calming it is. She had insomnia across most of her adult life. It was severe and chronic. She spoke about it and wrote about it at length. Oh my gosh, I've had insomnia, particularly as part of anxiety-related depression. I don't have it right now, and I'm so, so, so grateful. But there were years where I felt like I never slept. And it's awful. It's just, if you haven't experienced it, you can't even know how awful it is. It's a terrible, terrible feeling. I remember I used to hate 3 a.m. I'd wake up, it'd be 3. Couldn't go back to sleep, didn't want to get up, was tired all the time, was frustrated, was anxious, all these things. It's a horrible feeling. So I can relate. She described the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning as her most productive, but productive not in the way that you would typically think. So she describes those hours as the hours when she could not work. The weight of what she carried, the psychological material she'd been processing through her art for decades, it became too dense to sleep through. She had insomnia. She couldn't not work. She had to get up and work. She kept fabric and thread by her bed. So she just kept it by her bed. She didn't try to get up and go to the studio, but she knew that she needed to make things for her nervous system because she could not sleep if she did not find a way to channel all of that. So she would wake up, reach for her fabric and thread, and begin making fabric pieces. The fabric pieces she made during those nocturnal sessions are different in register from her sculptures. If you look at the Cells sculptures, CELLS series, they're really powerful in their scale and their enclosure. They're large. The fabric works are intimate at a level that the sculptures just aren't intimate. And part of that is the material, right? It's soft, yielding, warm feeling. These carry the body's relationship with the cloth, the blanket's weight, the skin warmth, the wrappability, the slight resistance of stitching. These fabric sculptures feel like they were held while they were being made because they were held by her while they were being made. She described this work as the work of the night. She described sewing as the action her hands knew how to do in the dark. Her sculptures required daylight, assistance from others, her whole studio, her situation, her health, her circumstance, her insomnia. She needed something else she could do in bed that felt different at night. The soft, repetitive, tactile engagement of working with fabric was doing something specific in those hours that the sculpture work could not do. So that's the mechanism I'm calling mapping. She's mapping her nervous system's requirements onto her material choices. The material choices carry the map. The fabric works themselves are the record of what her body needed at that time of day. As someone who has picked up crochet in order to get through the night and calm myself down, I understand how the fabric, the yarn, the thing you create with the thread or fabric or yarn or whatnot in the night, it's a record of what my body needed at the time. My body needed to sleep. My body needed to calm down. The words needed to get out of my head, and I needed to to get the energy out, but without like going out and running or making a big sculpture or whatever it is. The things I made carry that. They carry that. It's mapped into them. Mechanism 4 of how health impacts medium, the persistence of knowing. Okay, what do I mean by that? This is what happens when your primary medium becomes inaccessible due to health, but the knowledge accumulated in that medium relationship transfers into new practice in ways that you could not have designed in advance. So our example for this artist is Sarji Mann. This was a British realist painter, and I have to admit, he was one I did not know very well. I was kind of trying to research for writing something related to this topic, and he came up. I do want to learn more about him, but from what I learned so far, he was a British realist painter who spent his career painting landscapes, portraits, and figures in a tradition that required precise observation of light and spatial relationship. So he needed to see very clearly to be able to paint in the way that he was taught to paint or was moved to paint. In the 1970s, he had a detached retina and began losing his sight in one eye. His other eye deteriorated progressively over the next decades, and by the late 1990s, he was working with severely limited vision. Around 2005, he became completely blind. So this super interested me because of the slow process of how his health was impacting what he could do. It was in the 1970s when he started losing sight in one eye, and it wasn't until 2005 that he became completely blind, and it was changing throughout that time. Like I said, I really want to look at more of his work and see what I can learn. But what the point is here is he continued to paint. He painted without sight for about 10 years. He passed in 2015. So from 2005 until 2015, he was still painting and he could not see. And he produced actually hundreds of paintings during those years. They were exhibited, reviewed, and discussed. Really, people didn't say, oh, he painted these are good as for a blind person. They didn't qualify it. They were just good. They were just exhibited and reviewed as they were. But he had to change the method that he worked with in order to be able to continue working in this medium. So the method he developed was really elaborate. And part of it was that he had a studio where everything was in a fixed, specific position, and he memorized that position. And that way he did not have to be able to see in order to be able to access his materials. So every single paint tube was always in the same place. He had a palette that was specific in the way that it was laid out. He used a long stick to navigate between the canvas and the palette, tracking his brush location against the spatial map he held in his memory. He worked from the accumulated knowledge of decades of looking. He knew how the light behaved, how color sits in relationship to color, how figures occupy space. All of this knowledge was stored in a body that no longer had visual access to it. He could not see this anymore, but for years he had accumulated that knowledge. His critics noted, and it's something that stood out to me, is his late paintings were considered his most formally distinctive. The characteristic of the work that his critics identified as most specific to his vision as a painter was actually more pronounced in these 10 years when he was fully blind, not less pronounced. Who cares? What's the point of this? The knowledge of a medium, the accumulated understanding of the medium itself, what it does, how it behaves, what it produces under specific conditions, it can feel like it lives in the eyes, but it doesn't. It lives in the hands, in the body, in the spatial memory, in the aesthetic judgment that has been calibrated across decades of looking and making. When the primary sensory channel is gone, the rest of the knowledge still remains. And he's a really great example of this. So maybe health, losing your eyesight changes your medium, maybe not. Maybe you stop painting. Maybe you just change the situation so that you always know where your materials are because you put them in the same place so you don't have to see them, and you rely on the body memory and the knowledge that you have accumulated over all of those years to make, sorry, I heard my dogs. My dogs end up in the podcast sometime, even though you don't hear them, I hear them. The knowledge stored in the body. That's where we're at. Mechanism 5, we're moving on to scale. Scale really interests me. For a long time when I was forming my framework, I didn't know where to put scale. I didn't know if it should be its own thing. I know that health impacts the scale at which we can work. I ultimately, through lots of conversation and thinking and coding qualitative interviews, came to conclude that it primarily belongs in the materials category. The scale we work in changes generally in relation to our medium. Um, let's see. Actually trying to see if I can pause this. I don't think I can. Okay, well, we'll just leave that be, I guess, and keep working. Wish there was a way. There's got to be a way to pause this, right? Okay, well, I don't know what that way is, so I'm just going to keep talking. Um, Mechanism 5, scale compression. Okay, we're going back to that. Apologies for the distraction. The fifth mechanism is scale compression. When the health limits the physical scale of the work that an artist can sustain, the compression of the scale changes the relationship that you have with the material. So sometimes it means that you are closer to the work. Sometimes it requires smaller movements, or you as a body requires smaller movements, which changes the relationship with the medium. What the medium can do at a reduced scale is different from what it does on the large scale. It's not smaller in the sense of being diminished, even if it is smaller in the actual physical scale. We're going to talk about Paul Klee for this section. He was an artist who was diagnosed with scleroderma in 1935. This is a connective tissue disease that causes the skin and underlying tissue to harden and tighten. It affected his hands, which naturally affected his ability to make fine, precise marks as an artist, which was what had characterized his work in the 20s and the 30s, and now he couldn't do it in that same way. So he adapted. He shifted to creating larger, simpler forms. The intricate, architecturally detailed earlier work gave way to paintings of singular, broad figures, angels, arrows, all reduced to essential marks, larger marks, different scale of work, less detailed, right? So that's because his hands could not perform the technique of the earlier work. It was a different technique with different formal properties. Between his diagnosis in 1935 and his death only 5 years later in 1940, he produced over 9,000 works. 9,000 in 5 years. So he didn't stop working. He just changed the scale on the way that he was working. His late works, they're really different from everything that came before. If you don't know his work, you can look at them and kind of look at the hieroglyphic series. It's really stripped down to something essential. The larger marks carry a weight and a deliberateness that the intricate earlier work, for all its formal brilliance, does not carry. So he had this intricate work. It had value, but it was very, very, very different, right? Let's see. And let's see. I really need to see if there's a way that I can pause this. I apologize. I need to go deal with the doggies and I'm not done here. File, maybe pause. I have no idea. It is not letting me do anything. I wonder if I can cut this out after. Okay, well, I am going to pause that for 1 second. Okay, I'll be out in a few minutes. Okay. My apologies. I really need to learn how to use this tool better. Okay. Paul Klee. He changed his health, changed the kinds of strokes he could make with his painting. Okay, let's just move on to mechanism 6. I write up a lot of this in my Substack, createmefree.substack.com. So if you want to see reference the things that I'm talking about here with the less ums and ahs and pauses and not pauses that I'm still trying to figure out as a new podcaster, you can do that on the Substack where it's a little more professional looking, I hope. Okay. The sixth mechanism, duration constraint. So we were talking before about the constraint of scale, how you can't work at that big level anymore. Duration is a different version of that, right? You can't work for as long anymore, right? When health limits the sustainable duration of engagement with a medium, work that is conceived for shorter units of time develops formal properties specific to that. The work carries that constraint of time in it. So David Hockney is the artist we're going to talk about for this one. He is one of the most consistently visible British artists for a long time and is primarily known as a painter of large color saturated canvases. But since 2010-ish, he's also become known as someone who produces drawings and paintings on his iPad. And it's just been interesting to see the different medium. And he has spoken about this or written about this. He's been clear that it offers oil painting is just really different, right? The iPad is immediately available. It doesn't have to prepare, clean up, set up the studio, arrange the materials. It's just ready. It's just right there and ready. And he has described drawing on the iPad at moments in the early morning, in windows of energy during the day, in brief periods that oil painting would have used entirely in setup and takedown. What the iPad work shows formally is immediacy. The luminosity specific to the backlit screen, the scale constraint of the tablet surface. This is intimate in a way that his large canvases are not. He has a different relationship with line on the iPad than with a brush. Color is different. Everything is different. The work he has made on the iPad includes a large landscape series that he began during his COVID isolation. So that's kind of the health tie-in, right? It's just different. It's different than his other work. It's not better. It's not worse. There's just a lot of differences in the painting because he's using a different material. He chose a medium whose accessibility properties matched his body's available windows of time. He does not apologize for this. It's not an adaptation or a compromise. He frames it as a discovery when he talks about it. He's able to draw in pockets of time when he can't. So we can see this in young parents of young children often only have little limited amounts of time to work in, and their medium changes as a result. Maybe they, write poems instead of novels, or film shorts instead of large films, or whatever. Duration changes because of your health, because you just don't have time or energy or ability to work at that longer duration. So it changes your medium. And finally, cognitive restructuring of the visual image. So everything else we've talked about is kind of the circumstances actually change kind of the body, how your hands move, what your eyes see, how long you can work, the nervous system, the body itself. This one is when the disease changes how the brain constructs the image. So brain injuries that change the relationship with medium, specifically because they change the interpretation of image. William Utermohlen. Again, this was another one that I don't know a lot about. I looked him up as I was researching, and I'm going to learn more. But for now, what I know is he was an American realist painter born in Philadelphia in 1933 who spent his career making figurative work with a characteristic clarity of observation. He was not a famous artist in the way like some of these other people like Paul Klee are, but he was a working painter. He had a consistent practice, and he was really, really skilled at portraits. At the age of 61 in 1995, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He began making a series of self-portraits. He made them continuously with his wife Patricia's support through approximately the year 2000, when the disease had progressed to the point where sustained painting was no longer possible. There are 5 major self-portraits in the series from 1967 through 2000, and the progression is one of the most documented instances in art history of a neurological disease tracking itself. So he has his earlier self-portraits and then these self-portraits, and it really is the disease tracks itself through the changes. In 1967, the self-portrait is a painting, a man looking back at the viewer with clarity and presence. He has a full face, organized space around it. It's like a traditional portrait, and that's the kind of work he was known for. Fast forward to 1995, which is the year of his diagnosis, and we see a little bit that the spatial organization is a little different. His face is present, but the background is flatter. It's less differentiated. Simplified, I guess you would say, but you can still tell it's a portrait. Looking at his works in 97 and 98, we see the spatial coherence deteriorate even further. We still see a face. It's still recognizable as a face, but the relationship between the figure and the ground is really ambiguous now. The marks that should organize depth no longer do that job confidently. Takes us to 1989. Nearly flat composition. If you look at it, there is a face, but it's like barely a face. The background has collapsed. The portrait is not really so recognizable as a portrait. It's described as an image of a face struggling to hold its position in a field that is losing its organizing structure, which I think is just so powerful because it just just relates to the Alzheimer's and the way it reorganizes the brain, or the perception. And finally, the last one in 2000 is a gray field. There is a faint suggestion of a face, a few marks, and maybe an eye. But the face that looked back at the viewer in 1967 in that original self portrait is almost entirely absent. It's like he's a different person. He gave his consent and participation for the series to be exhibited during his lifetime. It's been written about widely in neurological journals, etc. And it's important to note that it's not just documenting that the paint, it's not documenting like, oh, he's losing his skill. He can't paint anymore. It's not that. It's his brain is losing the ability to form spatial relationships in the same way. He can still paint just fine. He just can't paint portraits in that way because his brain isn't seeing things that way. So that's a different mechanism where the brain changes how you perceive and therefore changes the way you represent your medium. Um, Yeah. Okay. So I feel like I've been a little all over the place with this podcast. I hope you're still hanging in there with me. Been a little scattered, and I'm gonna probably wrap this up now. But we've gone through the mechanisms. We've looked at 7 different artists. We've looked at the theorist Rosemary Garland Thompson, Garland Thompson. Um, let's see. I don't know. I think I'm going to end there. I think I'm just going to wrap this up. We are going to continue with Medium in the next episode. We have a couple episodes left in Medium before we move on to the next category. So we're going to talk about a different aspect of Medium. Next time it will be much less heavy on theory. This was our theory post. So thank you so much for being here. You can reach me through createmefree.substack.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.